Good afternoon. My name is Keswani. Today, May 15, 2012, marks the 64th anniversary since the Palestinian Nakba, the catastrophic expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes and their homelands, which was carried out in accordance with operational plans drawn up by the Haganah and in compliance with orders issued from the highest echelons of the Zionist leadership. Although frequently represented as crimes committed by individuals, the massacres, the looting, and destruction that characterize the depopulation of Palestine were components of a carefully designed military strategy developed and implemented by the leaders of the emerging State of Israel. This same State of Israel that three of you, select supervisors, visited as guests of the JCRC. This was not a vacation or a personal trip. This was a political visit. The supervisors visited Israel in their capacity as elected officials of San Francisco. The State of Israel represents an apartheid regime that has and continues to orchestrate a deliberate ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. As our elected representatives and as people in positions of power, we are here to tell you that this is unacceptable. We are here to demand that you hold a moral compass in alignment with justice and that Palestine not be made an exception.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Jackie Hadi. I was born and raised in San Francisco's Outer Mission. Like many other small business owners in San Francisco who are the heartbeat of the city and are today being honored by you, my father owned a store at the corner of Ocean and Otsego Avenues for 28 years, serving students at Balboa High School and Denman Middle School. Like hundreds of other Palestinians and Arabs, he is currently a cab driver in the city. My dad was born in a rented one-room house in Ramallah, Palestine in 1950, which his family of 12 shared after they were forced to flee Lit, the city on which the Tel Aviv airport now stands. I believe some of you have had the recent experience of entering Israel through that airport. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to welcome you. I can't go back. My father's father, Musa, was born in 1898, my own grandfather. Imagine, the early Zionists were making plans to make my infant grandfather homeless. He lived in Lid until July 1948 before being forced into exile as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel. These pictures are pictures of those refugees that left in 1948. Can you continue? Today marks the 64th year of that tragic event. Fleeing was supposed to be temporary, as the Jews who knocked on their door told them, and they would be able to come back. But when they did go back, their homes and lands were fenced off from them. Like many others, Palestinians were forced to leave their homelands. We should never forget that we occupy native land. Nor can we forget how Africans were brutally enslaved, being ripped away from their history and their cultural legacies to be subordinated in an ongoing two-tier system, much like the Palestinians still living in Israel as second-class citizens. Latinos in the city, undocumented and otherwise, also know what it is like to have to leave their families and homelands behind because of war in their homelands, often funded and trained by the U.S., like my father and thousands of other Palestinians. And the legacies of Chinese and other Asians in San Francisco is far-reaching, but has been paved by bitter treatment, much like that which Thai and Filipino migrant workers in Israel have to endure as domestic
Next speaker,
servants.
please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Dr. Jess Khandam. I'm a professor at UCSF. I'm also the president of the Arab Film Festival and board member and former president of the ACC. Since the 1990s, I've been working and visiting the Gaza Strip some dozens of times, and I'm here to tell you that the process of ethnic cleansing in Gaza continues by the government of Israel. Let me just give you a little sense of what's happening in Gaza right now, especially the supervisors who chose to go to Israel at the behest of the JCRC. 1.6 million Palestinians living in the largest open-air prison in the planet right now. It takes some 200 loads of food per day to keep Palestinians in Gaza at a subsistence below poverty level, and Israel lets in less than 20 truckloads of food, water, and medicine. It is a process of siege and ethnic cleansing that continues to this day. In December 2008 and 2009, the government of Israel embarked in a massive campaign of massacre of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, where 1,500 Palestinians were brutally murdered with F-16s and U.S.-made weaponry. 10,000 Palestinians were injured and 20,000 buildings were destroyed. To this day, Palestinians in Gaza are unable to rebuild the homes that were destroyed. I'm calling on the supervisors, especially those who choose to support Israel by going there at the behest of the JCRC, to define your moral compass. The Board of Supervisors is intent on creating the climate of equity, equality, and freedom of expression, and yet at the same time you're supporting a brutal apartheid regime. And yes, Supervisor Wiener, I'm looking directly at you.
I would ask the speakers to please refer their comments to the entire board.
The entire board didn't go to Israel, Supervisor Campos. If the entire board of supervisors did go, I would be addressing all of them. It's time for the Board of Supervisors to have their moral compass. People in Gaza are starving as we speak. It's the only place in the world where Palestinian children are shrinking because of the forced starvation that they're being subjected to on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Can I have the slideshow showing, please? My name is Sammy. I'm a San Francisco resident of District 5, and I'm here to tell you about Israel's system of land confiscation for Jewish use only. Since the late 19th century, the Zionist movement and the subsequent State of Israel have used various methods to confiscate the land in Palestine for Jewish-only use. First, purchase and eviction. In the period prior to 1947, the primary method was to have the Jewish National Fund purchase land from absentee landlords and evict all the non-Jewish inhabitants. The Jewish National Fund then prohibits people who are not Jewish to use or purchase its land. Second, violence. As the British were relinquishing control of the country, Zionist militias used violence, massacres such as at Deir Yassin, and threats of violence to cleanse large areas of land of their Palestinian inhabitants. Third, laws on absenteeism. In the period just after 1948, Palestinians, even some of those internally displaced within the State of Israel, were barred from returning to their homes and land, causing that land to be unused. The laws on absenteeism were then invoked to seize ownership and transfer the land to the Jewish National Fund. By 1953, the JNF owned 90% of the land captured for the new state of Israel. Fourth, military orders in security zones. Military emergency orders or declarations of an area as a quote-unquote security zone are used to clear inhabitants, consistently the non-Jewish Palestinians, from their homes and are prevented access to their land. The orders are maintained for long enough that then the absentee laws are invoked to transfer ownership of that land. These methods of land confiscation, their ultimate goal of an ethnically pure state, highlight the apartheid nature of the State of Israel. San Francisco values and the history of the Board of Supervisors in taking a stand against apartheid in South Africa dictate that you must end diplomatic relations with the apartheid State of Israel, and this includes refusing the free trips from the Israel lobby that you're routinely offering.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi. Can you please also continue the slideshow as I speak? Hello, everyone. My name is Bassima Sizemore, and I am here to commemorate May 15th, 1948, which in Palestinian history is remembered as Al-Nakba, or the catastrophe. In light of Al-Nakba, I would like to bring to your attention the traumatic and systematic history of Palestinian house demolitions by the Israeli government as a means to remove Palestinians from their homeland and advance Israel's occupation. In 1948, nearly 800,000 Palestinians were uprooted from their lands and displaced across the world, and 532 villages were erased as a result of Zionist colonialization. In 1948, the newly established entity of Israel began demolishing the homes of Palestinian refugees to prevent the return. More than 125,000 homes were systematically destroyed. During the 1967 war, Israel destroyed thousands of homes throughout the West Bank, as well as refugee camps in Jericho and the Gaza Strip. Since 1967, almost 18,000 homes have been demolished in the occupied Palestinian territories, and there are an estimated 12,000 outstanding demolition orders in the Galilee and 30,000 in the Negev to date. Israel uses house demolitions as a means to harass, demoralize, and further confiscate Palestinian land. The illegal Israeli practice of demolishing homes, basic infrastructure, and the sources of livelihoods continues to shatter and deteriorate the living conditions of entire Palestinian communities. One example of this, and a recent one, is on March 6, 2012, a village called El Arkib in the Negev, residential structures were destroyed for the 33rd time since July 2012 by Israeli bulldozers. The Jewish National Fund has been a key player in organizing the demolitions and clearing land to make way for a forest on El Arkib's land. The residents of this village now have been forced to live in the cemetery. I'm sharing this with you today to spread awareness of what is happening on the ground in Palestine and to commemorate this important day in Palestinian history. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Can I have the slideshow, please? Continuing. Hi, my name is Abdul Hadi. I'm a professor at San Francisco State University and a resident of San Francisco. Anyone who watched the news is aware that today marks the 77 days of the hunger strike of Bilal Diab and Athair Halahle, who were joined by 25 other Palestinian political prisoners to demand dignity. In particular, an end to administrative detention, a cruel practice of holding prisoners for 6 months without charges or due process that is renewable indefinitely. Inherited from British colonialism and perfected by Israeli colonialism, administrative detention has been condemned by the human rights community worldwide. Moving prisoners from occupied territories to the territories of the occupying power is categorically prohibited by the Fourth Geneva Convention, to which Israel is signatory, being at the time mindful of the deportation of European Jews from one location to another under Nazi rule. Notwithstanding the recent deal that may end the hunger strike, Israel continues to incarcerate over 5,000 Palestinian men, women, and children who are tortured physically, psychologically, and sexually by Israeli interrogators. Every Palestinian family has been touched by incarceration, even according to the New York Times. Did the supervisors who traveled to Israel at the expense of special interest groups ask about the conditions in Israeli jails of Palestinian prisoners? A question that would have been almost natural considering the large size of prisoner population in the US and in California in particular. Did their conscience ache for the crimes against humanity Israel subjects the Palestinians to? Will they do the right thing? Will they no longer travel to Israel to enable the continued oppression of the Palestinian people? Will they heed the call of Martin Luther King that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere? Neutrality in the face of criminality is complicity, and silence equals death. Will they speak up for justice? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors and the general public. My name is Zechariah Obama. I'm a student at San Francisco State University, entering my 4th year, studying international relations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the apartheid wall that Israel is building in Palestine. This is part of a bigger Israeli strategy that separates Palestinians from other Palestinians and also creates a system of segregation between Palestinians and Israelis. It's a heinous symbol of Israeli apartheid, and it's characterized by forced population transfer, land control through confiscation, labor exploitation, humiliation of an entire people, and cold-blooded murder. It makes apartheid possible. It confiscates Palestinian land so illegal settlements can be built. It restricts Palestinian movement and the ability to work and go to school. Nonviolent activists are routinely arrested or killed by Israel. The Gaza Strip is surrounded by the wall on all 3 sides and the Israeli Navy on the 4th side, cementing and creating a blockade that prevents basic human rights from being attained by the Palestinians. Palestinian neighborhoods in Jerusalem are dissected and some demolished to make room for the wall. The West Bank is fragmented like South African Bantustans and enclosed and circled by the wall. The wall divides Palestinian neighborhoods and villages and the families living there. It delays work, education, and healthcare of Palestinians who wait for passage at checkpoints every single day. Illegal. It's illegal under International Court of Justice and illegal under Israel's own Supreme Court, which call for it to be rerouted, but it continues to expand unabated. It makes peace negotiations impossible because it creates facts on the ground in contravention of international peace processes. It'll annex 50% of the West Bank when completed. It is 3 times longer than the Berlin Wall, which fell, and 2 times as high. Our money pays for it. U.S. tax dollars support the Israeli apartheid regime. The wall is a testament to an ongoing catastrophe for the Nakba of the Palestinian people, and as a city that prides itself on advancing human rights, on its proud history of taking a stand against South African apartheid in the past, I hope the city of San Francisco will reconsider any future trip to Israel. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Board of Supervisors and members of the public. My name is Charlie L. Khayri. I was born and raised in San Francisco and current resident as well. I'm here to talk about the commemoration of Nakba, which is the 64th year anniversary of Palestinians being forced out of their homeland. Now, in doing so, I want to touch on a couple things first. In previous years, you'll have other struggles that you've dealt with. You have issues relating to human rights and South Africa, issues of civil rights. I'm sure when there was slavery, there were people arguing for reasons of slavery. I'm sure there's people arguing for reasons to not allow gays, lesbians, LGBT community to not have equal rights. We're here to present ourselves as Palestinians when we're asking for to be recognized as equal humans in this society. And so what I want to talk about is the right of return. So my parents were forced out of Palestine and were not allowed to return to our homeland. Now this goes against the UN Resolution 194 and other, United States resolutions UN resolutions are to protect the society. So as the United States, the U.S. recognized Israel as a country almost immediately, but it's not supposed to allow for Palestinians to be forced out of our homeland. And Israel has the law of return, which gives any Jew to be an Israeli from anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the world even, rights to have land that belongs to Palestinians. So what I'm here to let you know is that when you look back to other people's struggles and dignities, you have to recognize Palestinians along with others as well. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Could we also play the slideshow? Thank you. Hi, my name is Miriam. I've been in City Hall a lot lately, working around the Safe San Francisco Civil Rights Ordinance, and I haven't felt this nervous for a long time. I feel like I want to point out a big hypocrisy that's going on. I have a lot of faith in the San Francisco, the government and elected officials in front of me. And as we recognize Small Business Month, I want to note that my grandmother is turning 90 next month, and we've owned a small business on 11th and Howard since 1967. I'm a proud San Francisco resident. I consider myself an active participant in making the city better, but I just feel like I feel very hurt that this hypocrisy exists. And I just wanted to note that as we commemorate also the Palestinian Nakba, Moshe Dayan, an Israeli military leader and politician, once said, Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You do not even know the names of these Arab villages, and I do not blame you because geography books no longer exist. Not only do those books not exist, the Arab villages are not there either. Nahlal arose where Mahlul, Kibbutz Gavat, in the place of Jibta, Kibbutz Sarid, in the place of Hanayfet, and Kufar Yeshua in the place of Tal al-Shuman. There is not one single place in this country that hasn't been built on a formal Arab population. Israel was built by depopulating villages, massacring and displacing Palestinian population. The supervisors that visited Israel in their capacity as elected officials are effectively supporting that apartheid regime, and I feel ashamed, and I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Nakatomi. As all who have come before me to testify that today marks the 64th anniversary of the Palestinian catastrophe al Nakba, I want to speak about Palestinians as refugees. In 1948, when the State of Israel was established, Palestinians were made what is constituted today as the world's largest and longest-lasting refugee population of the world. Palestinians today constitute over 4.5 million as registered refugees inside of the camps in surrounding Arab countries, 19 of which are in the West Bank, 12 in Lebanon, 10 in Jordan, 9 in Syria, and 6 in the Gaza Strip. These refugee camps, to live in a concrete refugee camp, which was supposed to be a temporary cloth tent, if you could please replay the slideshow, it was supposed to be cloth tents, those are images of 1948 when Palestinians were made into refugees, are now turned into 5, 6, 7-story concrete refugee camps in which Palestinians live in chronic poverty with mass disparity as stateless peoples of the world, as a people who are waiting their return to their homeland and continuously it being denied. The rest of us are Palestinians in exile prohibited from return. Today, we are marking 64 years of ethnic cleansing, 64 years of Palestinian genocide, in which the first way that they were able to get us off our lands was by massacres and was by rape, and which was by threats of rape and threats of massacres, by forced exile using military force as supplied by the British. And so I wonder, for those supervisors who just recently went on a trip to Israel, if you wondered what came before 532 villages were destroyed, if you wondered who planted the trees of those that you saw, if you wondered whose place is rightfully missing from that country when you walked around and you were painted a completely different portrait of what Israel is. There are millions of people who are awaiting their return to their homeland, and we would have gladly welcomed you so long as we would have had the right to be there, but we're not there because we're in exile.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.